I am no stranger to burnout. I am no stranger to life throwing me a curveball, having the rug pulled out from under my feet, and feeling completely lost and hopeless, and pulling myself up essentially by my bootstraps to reclaim my life as well as my passion for life. And this is one of the areas that's critically important to understand as we are, at any stage of our life, honestly, but especially as we enter the second spring of our lives. This today's podcast, I want to talk about this as well as giving you some strategies to implement into your life to create the optimism and to feel fully alive. My guest today is new to the Girlfriend Doctor Show, and she is a coach who helps successful women courageously and authentically live, work, and parent on their own terms. Heather Chauvin is my guest today, and she started her career as a social worker helping adults understand children's behavior. But it wasn't until 2013 when she suffered a stage 4 cancer diagnosis that pushed her to take a deeper stand for change. And in this process, she uncovered cultural experiences that sabotage our dream. So today we're going to talk about self empowerment and getting control of your life, feeling that empowerment, being the CEO of your health, your life, your body, and is critically important. So join me in welcoming my guest, Heather Chauvin. Well, welcome, Heather, to the Girlfriend Doctor Show. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Ann. I'm excited.
I'm excited too, and you have quite a personal transformation story. I would love for you to share it with my audience.
Yes. So it was, I mean, I always say to people, it's dependent on which transformation. I'm sure all the women that are
Oh,
listening,
yeah.
there's like different seasons in our lives where we're like, I was just getting the hang of it. And then something happens. So whether it's a crisis in our lives or children or whatever. So a huge part of my journey and my story is in December of 2013. So this year, actually, yeah, 10 plus years ago, I was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer. And at the time, my boys were 9, 5, and 1. And I was in startup in my business as well. So I was in a critical time in my personal and professional life. And my health, yeah, went into a crisis state. And that was not my first aha awakening moment. But one of them that was a big pivot in how I kind of live, how I parent, how I work, and how I support women as well.
And what happened from there? I mean, from that point of like the realization of the cancer, kind of feeling like your body betrayed you. How
Mhm.
did you dig in and lean to that empowerment piece to re-energize yourself from that?
Yeah. So the interesting part was it was 9 years before my diagnosis when I became a mother. That was kind of like my first aha moment, which was very pivotal of my relationship with my body, but also how I showed up as a mother and a woman in general post diagnosis. So I'm just going to pull it back a little bit. When I became a mom, I was actually young. I was 18 years old. And I remember feeling like, I don't want to fail as this role as a mother. And so instead of feeling like proud and excited, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I felt alone. I felt scared. And I went into like that hyper independence, that hyper overdrive. And before that, I wouldn't say I was like the type A, A plus student by any means, like the people pleaser, the overachiever. I would have been the underachiever. And so that was kind of when I first started to learn that self abandonment was the description of a successful woman in modern culture, especially if she's raising children. And that was where I said, okay, I looked outside of myself and I'm like, what do good women do? Air quotes. And what do good mothers do? And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to overcompensate because I already feel like there's a few strikes against me. And so I went and did all the things, and the feedback I'm getting culturally is, wow, you're superwoman. And, I'm getting the pats on the back. And I started to notice, like in my physical body, fatigue and exhaustion and all those things. And people were like, suck it up, buttercup. This is adulthood. This is motherhood. But there was like that little whisper part of me. And this is really, really, really important. That whisper part of me that was like, this is not sustainable. Like it could be intuition, whatever your belief systems are, but that deeper wisdom within us. And I'm like, this is not sustainable. And so I started seeking female mentorship and role models, whether it was personally or professionally. And I could not find anyone that was like, I feel successful, not I'm balancing life well and at home and in my work for those who did have professional careers, whether it was self-employment or not. And so I just started doing all of the things, realizing that my physical body was talking to me again and again and again. And I kept telling myself a story of, I do not have time for this. I do not have time for this. And I pushed through. And so as I pushed through, things just got worse and worse and worse. So at that time, 9 years of personal development under my belt, mentorship, retreats, podcast, books before it was even cool, you name it. Okay. So the seeds were planted. Then my diagnosis happened. And I physically remember the moment where I was like, you finally have my attention. Okay. I surrender. I will listen. And I knew it wasn't just the disease or like my body, but there was something bigger at play where I'm like, I can no longer live in denial that my needs matter and that I have wisdom within myself. And I abandoned that wisdom to actually please a cultural conversation of who I needed to be in the world.
Right, I think this is so, I mean, this is critically important. I want to thank you for sharing this aspect because, for me too, it was a mother, a business owner, as an employer, as a
Mm.
scientist, as a physician, all of these hats. Like I say, we have many hats to wear, but we're just expected to wear them all at the same time. And we get rewarded most by the workaholism, the continuing to do it, to push through, to power through. I hear these words from women all the time. I'm just powering through. I'm just pushing through it. Or until the point of exhaustion, I didn't stop. And so this
Mhm.
was that, essentially the rug being pulled out from under your feet type experience. And you're like, okay, well, how am I even going to survive this, let alone
Yeah.
thrive from this?
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a moment where I'm like, I felt like I was pushed into a corner. I couldn't, the things I was avoiding, I could no longer avoid. Right. And so obviously, I don't believe in like beating anything. I mean, even that term is like masculine. Like I got to beat this. Like I'm at war with my body. And I just had to soften and start listening. And I also knew that there was so much uncertainty, but all I could do was control what I could control. And so in that moment, post diagnosis, I remember having this like, I talk a lot about managing energy, not time. Like we all have time, we have a to-do list, we're going to check, we're going to get things done. But I had to figure out how to take all of the learning that I was learning in the personal development world and create a practical strategy from it. And that was when I was like, okay, how do I want to feel? I know I do not want to feel chronically depleted, anxious, overwhelmed, angry, resentful, frustrated. Like we all know how we don't want to feel, but there's no like step by step on how to get to where we want to go because we're telling ourselves, I don't have time. I can't do this, whatever. So because I didn't have any what I call back doors, I had no other option. The only way out was through because death was literally knocking on my door. I had to learn how to reverse engineer how I wanted to feel. And so there's a story that I tell, a moment where I was at home in between treatments and I was on the bathroom floor and, my nervous system, I'm like in fight or flight. I'm like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And I could get my brain present. So instead of being like in a state of chronic fear of like, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. I came back to the present moment. And the present moment was like, I'm like, I'm here. My body is telling me, pay attention, but I am here. I am alive. I am well. Then I asked myself the question, how do I want to feel? And I knew in that moment, I felt scared. I felt depleted. I felt like I was going to literally lose my life. And I'm like, but that's not how I want to feel. So I asked myself, how do I want to feel? And the first word that came to me was, I want to feel alive. And then I asked myself, okay, what do you need to do to feel alive? In that moment when I'm like I'm at my rock bottom. And I remember feeling fear again because I never this story, a lot of women say to me, yeah, yeah, I say I want to feel abundant, I want to feel healthy, I want to feel energized, but like I only have slivers of moments in my life when I felt that way. Maybe it was in my 20s, maybe it was like, how do we feel that now and embody it now with who we are today? And that moment, from that moment, I was never the same person because I'm like, I have to figure this out. And although I had the fear of the unknown, that I never actually knew what aliveness felt like in my being, because I went from like childhood to teenagehood right into mothering, I had to figure it out. I had no other option. And so I started asking myself, what do I think that would look like? What would an alive person do? She's going to get out of bed, she's going to take a shower. And the next day, I'm like, get up, take a shower. And if that's all you have the energy for, that's all you're going to do. And I call it the 10-minute habit. I'm like, listen, you don't need to go from 0 to 60. You can literally take 10 minutes at a time and act as if you are becoming the type of person you desire to be, embodying that energy. And slowly, 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 I came back to life. I actually think it was critical towards my recovery. And now I do that in all areas of my life and teach women to do the same in reverse engineering how they want to feel.
I love that. I love that you say you teach women how to manage their energy and not time. I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. So, describe the difference between managing your energy versus managing your time, and how do they overlap, or, how do you separate them?
Yeah. So there's one of my favorite journal prompts, and I always encourage people to utilize this. Like if you're listening to something or listening to me right now, is wouldn't it be nice if? And just take 2 minutes and ask yourself, wouldn't it be nice if I had a glass of water? Wouldn't it be nice if I went for a walk in the sun? Wouldn't it be nice if I didn't worry about XYZ? And just write it down. Those are desires within you. Most of the time, the reason why they're not being fulfilled is because you just are legit abandoning them. Like your physical body is saying, I'm thirsty. And you're like, I don't have time to go grab a glass of water. Like some of these desires are so simple to solve. And then there's bigger ones. And so you have to look at this list. I mean, this is a super quick overview. I go much more depth into this, but every desire that you have, simple or large, whatever it is an actual feeling. It's not the thing you're craving, it's the feeling. So you'll even something, I want to make more money. Why do you want to make more money? Because I want to feel safe. If that's a feeling, you can still feel safe with what's in your bank account. Um, I want to make more money because I want safety. I want freedom. Like I want to travel. I want abundance. Everything that you desire is a feeling. Why do you go buy a new outfit? What is the feeling that you're after? Why do you get your hair done? What is the feeling that you're after? Everything is a feeling. When you can tap into the fact that everything that we do is feeling related, then you're like, oh, I'm after the feeling. I'm not after the goal, or I'm not after the thing. I always ask people, have you ever accomplished that goal that you said you wanted to accomplish and you didn't achieve? You're like, you got there and you're like, oh, I didn't acquire what I thought I was going to acquire. Right. And so when you get there, you realize this is the journey, this is the feeling. And so the whole time managing your energy, not your time, is like, how do I feel today? Well, I'm not aligned. Great. What do I need to do to get back in alignment? And so I'm like, there's no right or wrong here. There's no perfection. We still have to get things done. We're not abandoning our to-do list or our family's needs, but we are asking ourselves, what do I need? And I may not be able to do it today. But you're like, wow, I'm on the brink of burnout. I'm overwhelmed. And then once you start learning strategies to manage that energy, you become more aligned and feel in control of your life. And then we're not blaming time as the reason why we can't do something else. We're reverse engineering from the inside out. We learn to communicate differently. We learn to manage ourselves differently, the mental energy, emotional energy, physical energy, relational energy, like even just with people. And it just completely changes the trajectory of your life. And you realize, oh, wow, I'm doing these things to please other people and not really even honor my needs, the way we work, all the things.
That is so, I mean, really, thank you. It's very, very powerful to hear you say this, and think I can think of so many examples and so many situations in my own life. And one particular experience comes to mind, and where I was doing a group counseling session. I was in a group counseling session. We were on doing boundaries from Dr. Cloud's book on boundaries. And so one of my friends who's extremely successful business owner, extremely successful entrepreneur, and she relays the story that when she was asked, well, where is your red dot? Like, what are you feeling? She was immobilized. She's like, I don't even know what I'm feeling. I've learned not to feel because,
Yeah.
I've learned to work. I've learned to do, but I've learned not to feel. So she said it expressed that it took a significant amount of work and meditation to just really realize where is her red dot today and throughout the day. What is she feeling? And
Yeah.
I'd love for you to talk about that because so many times we just like cover up the truth, or we don't even unconsciously, we're not even connected to how we're feeling at the moment.
Yeah. So so my podcast is called Emotionally Uncomfortable for that exact reason. When I started, so my background is in social work, and then I got into this world of through relationships, through seeing and understanding. People wanted to understand their children's behavior. And I realized at the core of this is about emotional intelligence and understanding the like language of human behavior. But wherever we start to develop these coping strategies, but if you identify as a workaholic or someone's like, I'll get things done, I'm the doer, a lot of people rely on me. I attract a lot of women who carry a lot of responsibility, and they got to put the face on. They're like, I have no other option, right? I gotta do. And then your physical body, your mental body, like something's going to eventually break down. I was speaking to a woman yesterday and she's like, Heather, I'm at 2 million. We're headed to 5 million in the company. And, she's like, I thought the money was going to make me happy. And she goes, I don't know how to experience joy. And she's like, my goal is I want to be in a really quality relationship and I want to start a family and I want to be happy and I want to experience all these things. And I thought once I got the money, then these things would happen. And so when we started to break down what was actually going on, she's like, I don't trust people. I don't trust people. I keep saying I need systems and processes, and I'm like, but you're taking on everyone else's stuff and you're not giving it back to them. So we become over nurturers, we become rescuers, we become doing all these things. But it's very intimidating to a woman who on the outside is perceived as successful, and I'm using air quotes, and people are intimidated by them and going, oh my gosh, like your life must be perfect. And on the inside, they're like, I feel inadequate because I'm very smart and intelligent, but I don't know how to manage, or I don't know how to feel. Right. And so I notice that when I start working with somebody who's a doer and workaholic and go-getter, I'll say, listen, this is what you need. And she's like, no, 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 that is not my comfort zone. And I always tell people, um, you will be successful if you put time and energy into something you don't want to do. And if you put something in a skill that you want to learn that is maybe emotionally uncomfortable for you. So I always say, if this is uncomfortable, it's a growth opportunity and you are leaning into it. And then swinging on the other side, there are people that I say need boundaries with their emotions. They're like, I'm too sensitive. I'm too much of a feeler. And I would probably identify that I used to be that type of person. And to me, balance, when people are like, how do I balance? It's learning when to not over identify with your feelings because they lie to us too. And also not to be too much in the doer mode when we're like cutting off ourselves. And so that's just a journey within. You get to know yourself and be like, do I need to lean into this more, or do I need to like be like, okay, it's okay that that person is uncomfortable. It's okay that that person doesn't like me today. Yes, I triggered my child or whatever it is, versus, wow, I'm just in the doer mode and I'm actually not feeling right now. And we kind of do both because we develop these coping strategies to literally exist in the world. And that's a beautiful thing because the body is designed to keep us alive. But it's not designed to help us thrive. So we need to really kind of figure out, where do I need to lean in and where do I need to like, manage that?
I love that. I love that perspective because, feeling too much and then not being in touch with our feelings at all. And it brings to mind a prior podcast guest, Marcy Shimhoff. She
Mhm.
wrote Happy for No Reason. And it's a great episode to listen to after this one, you guys. So take a look at that on my girlfriend doctor show. But Happy for No Reason. So to actually tap in to become happy despite the circumstances you're in. In my programs, in my Magic Menopause group, I teach about being the eye of the storm or the ocean, not the waves, and how to really ground yourself in the present moment with gratitude whenever possible, when it seems like there's absolutely nothing to be grateful for, and that's how I survived significant trauma and stress and depression and suicidal ideations, and that was to refocus in the present moment and compartmentalize till I had the space to dig deep into those feelings, those emotions um, that experience. So you teach in that realm. You teach about a 10-minute habit that you coach women on to really
Mhm.
shift and transform. Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So this, I didn't actually know I was doing this, but it kind of went back to that moment where I'm like, how do I want to feel? And I want to feel alive. And the next step after that, so there is a PDF I bring people through, and I can share the link for that because it's on my website, just my name. But after you get your wouldn't it be nice list and you look at it and you think, what is the feeling I'm after? Right? You're gonna say things like energized, alive, abundant. You're definitely not going to say, I want to feel like crap. I want to be like in debt. I want to be, disrespected. We're all
A doormat,
choosing.
all those things.
Yes, we all know how we want to feel, right? And it's a variation of the same thing, alive, energized. We all want to feel good in some capacity. We just don't necessarily have the skills or know how to, get there, or just like the doubt and the inner critic are too overwhelming for us. So once you have the feeling word, I always say take one word and ask yourself. So when I use the term alive, I'm like, what what does that mean to me? And what it means to me is going to be very different than the next person. And so I started kind of like having action steps based on aliveness. And I'm like, okay, well, I think an alive version of me would go for a walk. I think an alive version of me would create space to eat my meals. I think an alive version of me might actually go sit in a cafe. And I had young kids at the time, by myself and journal. And this is way before Instagram was all like picture perfect. And so I wrote these things down, and then I started putting those actions on my to-do list so that I could have little sips of filling myself up. Now, here's the catch, and I'm just going to call it out. And I always use the analogy of like cups, and I have like literally 3 cups on my desk right now. But if you have a cup that is full of water and you have a cup full of coffee, okay? The cup full of coffee represents how you currently feel. So it's this dark substance, and you're like, this feels like lack. This feels overwhelmed. This feels like not enough. You know, just not in alignment with how you want to feel. Your other cup full of water, abundant, alive, energized. If I just put a spoonful in the coffee cup, what's going to happen? Not much, right? So 10 minutes at a time. It is going to take the consistency of habit formation in order for me to pour all of that water inside of that coffee cup and for the coffee to come up and out. And so that is the challenge here, is stepping into the unknown and doing it consistently and long enough for your identity to change. So the first time I went to a cafe, because I started writing my list, my 10-minute habits, although I'll talk about what that actually means, but I went to a cafe by myself. I think I was still breastfeeding. I brought a journal, spent way too much for a latte, and I'm sitting there because I'm like, this is what it appears like people who love their life do. Okay. So I'm sitting there and I start crying. And I'm like, wow, I'm feeling the opposite of the way I thought I would feel. But guess what was happening? What was in me that I was avoiding came up and out. So that coffee represented guilt. I felt so guilty for leaving my family, and I had to feel what was inside of me as I was pouring what I desired in me. And so it was coming up and out. And I remember the emotional discomfort, which is why I call my podcast Emotionally Uncomfortable. I'm like, listen, you can go in your past and you could talk about your past forever. But the second you go into your future and say, this is the vision that I want and desire, and you start acting on it, whatever was stopping you is going to come up and out. So if you want to move really quick in your life and get a quicker result, I'm like, do the thing you don't want to do. Start putting those things on your calendar first. So I put go to a cafe. But if you're like, well, I can't go to a cafe, that's fine. What does that mean? Maybe it is journaling for 10 minutes on your porch when your kids are in the house or they're running around and you have headphones on because you're so overstimulated, and you sit there and you're frozen because you're like, I don't know what to write. Every time I write, it's a to-do list. You have to sit with the resistance and keep going. And I started doing that, rinse and repeat, because I didn't have any other option. I knew going back was, I was at my breaking point. And so I just kept focusing on how I wanted to feel, putting those tiny, tiny habits on my calendar 10 minutes at a time. And then if I went for that 10-minute walk and it turned into a 20 or 30-minute walk, that was bonus time. And then later coming to find out, for those who've read the book Atomic Habits, the science of habit formation, this is how you create habits and change your identity. You put votes in for the type of person you want to be and for the type of how you want to feel. And eventually, very uncomfortable, but eventually you get to that point where you're like, wow, my identity has shifted. And now my baseline is feeling energized, so that when something changes, like your hormones change, you're in like perimenopause, you're like, something's off, rather than this is what it is.
I think that's so empowering. One of the things that, I mean, I really love the concept of creating, creating becoming who you're creating for yourself, that vision of yourself, how you want to live your life. And that in this way, prioritizing you and your time and your energy in this direction. And it's so worth it, right? It's so worth it. And I always like get stuck, when you heard, maybe, our listeners have heard it takes 21 days to make a habit. I'm like, it takes me a heck of a lot longer than 21 days to make a habit. That's the challenge.
I'm like 3 years on certain habits, and I'm just like, I have to let go of timelines.
Totally, absolutely. And I love the book Atomic Habits. That's a great read. And Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, also
Yes.
another great read. And just the concept of becoming who you really want to be and feeling the way you want to feel. Because how often do we say, okay, let's say I want to make this amount of money, or I want to have this certificate or certification. And you're like, okay, not feeling it. Let me go for the next one. Let me work harder. Let me do more.
Yeah.
And it's not filling. It's not filling our our emotional capacity, our emotional bucket. And the way, you know, as you represent, especially have been a young mother, and as a mom myself of my five, that concept of I couldn't get my family better until I myself got better.
Yeah. That's the power of a woman. And the people who inspire me the most are people who are I say owning their power, but they're doing it, I love when I meet people and I'm like, they're present, right? They're present, they're compassionate, they're vulnerable, they're doing good work in the world. And then when you get to meet these people in their inner circle, they're like, this is not easy, right? I say things are not I actually don't believe in hard things. I just believe things are emotionally uncomfortable because I think we're addicted to hard. But when you become that person, like we can never see it because we're so too close to ourselves. So we can always see it in other people, but it's true. The fact that we have such influence in our homes, we are the culture creators in our homes, in our communities, like that is the power of a woman. But if we don't think we matter, if we're like, oh, I'm not worthy of that, I'm like, you can tell yourself that story all you want.
Right.
Like
Or
we all
I'm
have
too
work to do.
old, or I'm, you know, yeah, this is
Yes.
just what I have to deal with. Right.
Yeah. And I've seen it again and again, not only I'm not going to say my clients, but like even in my home. Like my mother lives with us and she's like, you inspire me. And I'm like, well, I don't try to change you anymore, but she's like, you just inspire me by how you lead your life. And I think if that's interesting, how if we just become, like if we do the work ourselves, our children are watching us. And then that way, as they get older and older too, at first it was really difficult for me to comprehend, how do I take care of myself plus everyone else? And now it's part of my identity and who I am and how I show up. But I'm telling you, I have the capacity to take on bigger and bigger and bigger problems and bigger emotions. So when things happen and my kids come to me, I'm like, I've got you. Might go cry in fetal position, but I know what I need to do to manage myself, get back on track, and to be able to hold that. And I'm much more receptive to asking for help, and getting support from other people too, knowing that I don't need to solve everybody's problems. I can show up for them and say, I'll help you figure this out. And it's more of like a collaborative effort rather than I need to know everything.
And there's so much valuable information in this conversation, and I'm grateful for you, Heather, for sharing it, and also for your journey and the way you're leading by example, leading your life. Like, and I challenge my listeners: what does your ideal life look like? How do you want to show up for yourself? How do you want to show up for those around you? And how will that, how does that feel? Can you embrace that feeling now so it attracts that life you want? It's the reverse engineering
Yeah.
of reverse engineering of our experiences that we desire so much. And at the beginning of the show, you started off with understanding, well, what do you hope to feel when you get there, right? Like when you achieve this goal or you achieve this degree or whatever it may be. Like, what do you hope to feel? Like when you lose weight, when you balance your hormones, what's the underlying motivating factor that is really driving you? And what is your core motivating factor? What is really motivating you? What feeling, what desire, what um, image of yourself? And I think there's that sense of touching into what's real for us, Heather. And if you could share getting into that true self when you've had to wear so many costumes for so long.
Mm. There's so much in what you just said where I got really excited because I think the number one word that just like stuck out is like how you want to lead. I actually, every time I ask a woman, like, do you identify as a leader? 9 out of 10 times she says no, right? They don't, even if they're in leadership roles. And the interesting part is when I started my work, like my actual business, and I left my former life as a social worker, it was this parent-child relationship. And then I saw how women were doing this in their teams as well. So whether they were leading other people, and I'm like, listen, how you do, they say how you do one thing is how you do everything, which sure, whatever. We can have all these cliche sayings. But what I noticed is the way we lead makes such an impact in the people around us. And the feeling like now when I see this or hear this, when you're like, reverse engineer how you want to feel, if you think about it logically, most people are like, reverse engineer your plan, reverse engineer your strategy. You know your goal, reverse engineer that. And yeah, awesome. But we do forget that we are emotional beings. And if we forget that we are emotional beings, we become robotic. And then we don't consider the emotions of other people. I always think life, it could be a relationship. So people will come to me and say, this relationship is triggering me and it's actually sucking the life out of me. Like it's debilitating. And then, or profit in my business, like revenue, like there's something going on there, or my team structure, like something is stressing you out. And I always say that's your symptom, right? We don't need to like push through. We don't need to avoid. It's the same thing as if your body is saying, I got a rash, I got a pain. Like that's a symptom. It's like, hey, I'm trying to get your attention. So when we look at these things that are not aligned in our life, like contrast, they're symptomatic. And we have to change our belief around it. It's not that we're broken. It's not that we're not worthy of having what we want and desire. It's that we're not looking at things as symptomatic. We're looking at, oh, that's what I get. And so it's a challenge. You have to want change in order to actually change. And I'm so grateful. I'm not great. I don't want women to be diagnosed with something or a crisis by any means. But when cancer came into my life, it made me look at the parts of myself that I was not giving myself permission to live. Um, and I actually had to get a diagnosis and not, stage one. I was like, oh, stage one, I'll be okay. A stage four, there was no stage five in my diagnosis. And it was like, if you don't turn the ship around, like you can't keep telling yourself that you are not worthy of feeling good. Because if you keep saying this, you won't have any more life left to live. So it kind of called me out on my BS, and I had to check that suffering box. I had to give myself permission and just test it, which ironically has been a lifesaver, but also has made life easier, has made not parenting is incredibly challenging, but it has made my personal life thrive and my professional life as well.
I love that. Heather, I want to thank you so much for being on the Girlfriend Doctor Show. We'll put the link to the worksheet on your website. We'll put it below in the show notes below this video or audio, depending on where you're listening to the Girlfriend Doctor Show. And just tell our audience where they can connect with you.
Yeah, so you can get like a whole bunch of freebies on my website, Heather Chauvin, CHAUVIN.com. And I talk a lot on my own podcast, Emotionally Uncomfortable. I do a lot of like lives, workshops. I always just tell people if you're attracted to wanting to feel good while going after your goals, whether it's personally or professionally, there is a way. And just because you have a story around it or the other, like you could be the culture creator in your personal and professional life. And I think it's time. We need to stop telling ourselves we can't do things when we literally create magic in our own lives. So we can feel better doing it. But yeah, the podcast Emotionally Uncomfortable or my website,
I
heatherchauvin.com.
love that, creating magic, right? In my Magic Menopause program, we talk about that a lot. Like, what are we creating in our lives? How are we creating magic? How are we bringing,
Yeah.
this magnetism into our life and passion? And it's so true at any stage of our life and in so many degrees. And this conversation has been incredibly helpful. And I love that you talk about being emotionally uncomfortable. That's where we need to dig in a little deeper. So thank you so much for being on the show, you guys. HeatherChauvin.com, and check out her podcast, Emotionally Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because lots of gems here. I know you'll want to listen this again, and please share this with your friends. Creating habits that serve us in our life is probably one of the biggest challenges that we can seem to face, because you want to adopt something new, you want to incorporate something in your life. So many times you say, oh God, I felt so great doing this, why did I stop doing it? And it's often just have to remind yourself, you have to schedule it in for yourself, you have to remember why you started in the first place and who you're becoming and what that feels like to be that person. And so embracing that, I promise you, embracing that, taking the next right step, one after the other, is going to lead you into that experience and transform your life in so many positive ways. I thank you for listening to the Girlfriend Doctor Show, and I am grateful for you sharing the show and sharing this episode and spreading the words, but mostly incorporating at least one or two of the amazing gems we learned today into your life. And let me know, please let me know what you learn, how it works with you, and share that with me. So thank you for being here. Till next time, God bless.